Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and today we are talking once again about building circular economies, and in particular the role and challenge facing infrastructure as it tackles this issue as part of its journey towards a net zero carbon emissions future. I say once again because regular listeners will know that last July I talked to sustainability champion Mark Enzer on the podcast about many of the core concepts that inform the built environment's transition to a circular economy, so do check that out. But as we discussed then, there are many definitions of a circular economy. One is about enabling people and nature to live and grow within the planet's capacity to provide resources and handle waste, which is a definition that certainly works for me today, given that my guest has just been nominated for a prestigious Earthshot Prize, a prize launched by Prince William in 2020 to search for and scale the most innovative solutions to the world's greatest environmental challenges. John Twitchen is the founder of Stuff for Life, and he has been nominated for his work to tackle and reuse the vast amounts of waste polyester clothing that is typically burnt, landfilled or abandoned each year all around the world, which is interesting, but I suppose what's that got to do with infrastructure? Well, Stuff for Life has developed a new technique to deconstruct and recycle existing polyester clothes, such as those typically used to make the ubiquitous high-vis workwear issued in construction sites. And he's also now working to create a new range of workwear that is designed with reuse in mind and is already being used and seen on railways and construction sites across the UK. John, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast.
Hi, Anthony. Good to see you.
Well, John, firstly, congratulations on being nominated for the Earthshot Prize for Stuff for Life. It's a huge accolade, and I tried to explain what you do and why you've been nominated. I mean, did I get it right? What are you doing that caught the judge's eye?
Yeah, I suppose what we're doing that caught the eye, if you like, of the nomination process, I suppose is the core of the process. But it's more than that. It's the whole system thinking that I think really sets what we're doing apart. It's not just about recycling. Yeah, that's a really important part of it. Having a solution for stuff at the end of the process anchors the ability to think about everything else. So we're as you say, we're taking polyester garments. Our focus has been on workwear. We're chemically taking them apart, depolymerizing them. Polyester is PET, polyethylene terephthalate. So we basically end up with a bunch of white powder that I drive around the country with some of as samples, which makes it interesting if you have a conversation with the police. But anyway, but yeah, basically it's depolymerizing that garment and manufacturing the feedstock materials, the chemicals that can be used again to make exactly the same thing. Right. So it's not in any way downcycling. It's absolutely about recycling it back into the same thing, which obviously is the anchor of the circular economy. But as I say, alluding to, we're focused on workwear. Obviously, that's super important to everyone listening to this, because, and probably our parents as well, because and our families and whatever, because it's what helps us get home at safe at night and all those things, and helps us keep us dry, warm, performing.
You started the business with a colleague, Miles Watkins, and you've been working with Teesside University and the Centre for Process Innovation, which is helping to, I think, scale up the extraction process for the polyester, the PET. I mean, how did that whole business idea come about? What's the backstory to it?
I was introduced to a person who's now become a really good friend, and He had a clothing company. He was making stuff that was better. It was made from recycled materials, bottles primarily, polyester. It's sportswear, and it was climate positive and all those really positive, really good things. And I said, well, that at the end, when it's dead, what happens then? And he said, well, it's really, then nothing, because there's no one able to recycle this stuff. So I said, well, so it's kind of like just a bit less crap then in that sense, because it's better, but it's not, it's still going in the same hole or opportunity or whatever at the end of its life. He said, well, it's really difficult. I said, well, it can't be that hard. Anyway, it turns out it's quite hard, but we've made some good progress, and that's where we were introduced to David Hughes at Teesside University, who also then introduced us to CPI, the Centre for Process Innovation. David and his team have helped us develop the IP and the patent, and CPI have helped us upscale. And of course, ARCO have helped in terms of funding and then engaging to redesign a range of clothing so that it can go through this process even better.
Well, Arco, we'll talk about Arco in a minute. Arco is the company that you're working with to actually take, I suppose, make better materials, better clothing at the end of the day. Just talk me through the process, though. I mean, how do you do this? Where does the recycling stock, for instance, come from to create this white powder? Is any polyester useful, or is it something specific about work and high-vis workwear?
Well, the specific thing about high-vis workwear is it's even more difficult than just basic polyester. So in an ideal world, you'd start with white, flat polyester with nothing printed on it or in it or attached to it. But of course, we went with the bells and whistles and the very bright and the very dark colours as well, thinking about security uniforms and so on. Which is just a whole world of pain in terms of extracting those pigments and dyes.
But also, it's got things like Velcro attached to it. It's got zips. It's got all sorts of other bits, which presumably make it harder. Yeah,
so they block pipes. I mean, there's some chemistry issues, if you like, but the main issue is that they block the pipes and the pumps, and get stuck around the impeller and stuff like that. It obviously makes it harder to get a clean end product with all those things in there, but that's where we focused and tackled the really hard stuff, so that everything else in theory is going to be easier.
Which is why what you're doing now, working with Arco to create a range of workwear which doesn't have so many potential pipe blocking, hard to recycle bits in it.
Yeah, so the Velcro is a polyester base. The high-vis, I mean, I've got one over here, and you've probably seen it, but the high-vis strips are now PET polyester backed as well, where they used to be PVC. So if you've got a high-vis at home or at work or whatever, if the high-vis strip is really like tough and hard and doesn't really flex as much as the jacket, then it's probably PVC. So those are areas. I mean, we were putting them through our process, and then you imagine on a tray the entrails, the things that didn't go through the process, and then we basically worked one by one through those materials with Arco to say, hey, how could this be designed better, different, from PET, so it could go through the process. But the really important part as well is designing for longevity, so it lasts longer. Because that in-use phase, again, you've heard this before with buildings and BIM and everything else, it's really similar. That in-use phase is the critical part. That's where, you need to design so that the in-use phase is maximised, and then the end of life is simplified as far as possible. And that's really where we've spent a huge amount of time with Arco and with Teesside University.
So how far have you got? I mean, what's the scale of your activities right now? Is it beyond a startup pilot yet? Can you buy this stuff?
So you can buy the clothes, the workwear from Arco. So that's been designed. It's got GRS, so Global Recycling Standard certified material in it. So at the moment, that's coming from bottles or other materials. It's not coming from recycled garments, because frankly, no one is doing it in this way at this level. There's no one doing it. But that's obviously our goal, is to get these feedstock materials back into new clothing, back into the same high-vis that you wear. That's an ultimate goal, because a lot of this stuff happens overseas, a very long way away, etc. But in terms of our process, I suppose there's two elements to it. There's the reuse piece and keeping stuff in play that exists now, where you maybe rebrand your company and you have to get rid of some workwear. We're working with companies to debrand or rebrand that, keep it in play, like donations, if you like, think of it that way, resell it, get it back into play in smaller organisations or charities or not-for-profits, but keep an eye on it, and we want it back so we can recycle it.
Yeah.
And then of course when it's definitely dead, we can process it. So we're in kilos at the moment, and our aim, our next step will be tons.
Right.
So that hopefully is the next month or two.
Yeah. Which is presumably where the Earthshot Prize nomination comes in. I mean, what would a win mean for the business?
Well, ultimately it means $1 million or dollars or whatever they pay in.
Right, yeah.
But to be honest, this is, just being nominated is so huge. We're so blown away by the whole thing, to be honest, and it means a hell of a lot anyway. So even if we don't win, it means a lot.
Yeah. It gives you a calling card.
Yeah, and it's eyes on, isn't it? It's a third party independently saying, well, we think this is actually really innovative, and again, it's not just the technology, it's the approach that we take, the whole business piece, that whole life kind of look.
Because essentially you describe stuff for life, as a circularity business. So I try to describe circularity. What does that mean to you in practice?
Well, it literally means things going round and round. But in my mind, and again, environmental science degree, 30 years of being moderately to extremely frustrated with the pace of change. It means things lasting longer and built to last and built to be, sort of taken apart at the end. So the whole second time, so stuff for life second time is about keeping stuff in play for its designed life for as long as possible, really. Not so it's unsafe, so you're not visible at work, for example, but, if you've had a load of stuff branded up and then you change your company branding, and it's never been used, there's nothing wrong with it other than it's got the wrong name on it. And if you've gone down the route of putting, writing Anthony Oliver on the front of it, and then Anthony Oliver leaves, then you've got a real problem because the branding's relevant, but the name isn't. So there's some design pieces around how you spec things. There's some design around how something's built to last. And then there's obviously, opportunities to keep it in play, even if it didn't last as long as it should have done. So there's a whole service piece in there as well, which I think is really interesting as a business model, as an opportunity, as a way of making money. You might sell fewer, but if there's a service around them, then there's still the opportunity to make a decent margin, a decent living, and then of course when they're dead they can be recycled. So it's all of those steps that's important.
So it's getting people to think more long term about their purchasing decisions in that area. But of course the business span out of your EMV23 environmental consultancy. As you say, circularity and sustainability has been at the heart of your work for 25, 30 years. You say you're still frustrated by it. What is the difference between the world 30 years ago and today?
Well, it's warmer, isn't it? That's the biggest failing that of all of us, I think, is we haven't really cut through on that. And I try desperately hard not to, think, well, it's too late, because it isn't. There's plenty we can do, and actually it becomes even more important if we have missed a few of the early opportunities to make a bigger, easier, cheaper difference. We've just got to work harder now. I'm not completely downbeat about it, but I think along with my impatience, there's also a growing impetus to do something. But I think what's different is particularly with larger organisations, and particularly infrastructure type organisations that you and I have spent a lot of time with over the last 25 years or so, is they get it. And so even if a government, whether it's, this country or another country, even if a government or a set of decision makers in terms of policy don't get it for whatever reason, the big organisations get it, and so do small ones. You look out the window and things are changing. There's no two ways about it. You go to your supply chain and, prices are increasing because of shortage of supply. You think about your, the long term and shareholder value, or, what NGOs and stakeholders are telling you, the evidence is there, and you make different decisions. So whether it's an internal carbon price or something else that's getting you, getting things moving for your organization, that's what's changing. And I think that's where our business model kind of, is the right time to be talking about whole systems. And, you've worked really hard to own a bunch of stuff, and some polyester in this case. Why would you throw it away and give it, pay someone to take it away? Why not say, hey, how can we keep that material if it can be done in an economic way? And that doesn't mean cheap. It doesn't mean unit cost. It means look at the system. How can we do it differently?
But clearly there's a long way to go. But if you look at what's going on in the construction sector, all across the whole infrastructure sector, we are seeing advances when it comes to waste reduction, and also in recycling and circularity in the way that you put it there. So, is there still more low-hanging fruit for the industry and the sector to grab hold of, or is it just getting harder?
Well, I think there's still some really basic stuff that isn't happening very well. I mean, I'm others will have different views, but I'm a big fan of deposits and deposit return schemes, because it provides a reason for a transaction at the end. What's interesting is just this week there was someone's fly tips a load of loft insulation, but it's the spray-on foam stuff, and they've dumped it in a private side road somewhere, because there's no responsibility at end of life. It's increasingly difficult to get rid of it. We're doing some work in concrete as well, which I think, we can talk about another day, but, concrete as a service, actually, you don't want those contaminants in that material if you're going to put it back into the same use. So EPR of everything, I think, is the bit that's low hanging fruit, because the stuff that's fly tip, the stuff that turns up in, country lanes and whatever is probably the stuff that needs to be EPR'd, if you like, producer responsibility, because clearly there's a failure, right? It's been fly tipped, so there's clearly a failure. Like clothes being dumped overseas, clearly there's a failure. We need producer responsibility. Put the deposit on something like batteries. I'm doing a piece of work on batteries for CIWM, the Waste Management Institution at the moment. And a small deposit on a battery in a cheap product would make the end of life decision different, and it would also make the design different. So with a relatively small, low hanging fruit targeted piece of new rule, if you like, you can fundamentally change stuff. And then we've got the carbon. I always get the order of them wrong, but the carbon border adjustment tariff or mechanism or whatever, that's game changing. I think. Those things make me very positive and very excited for the future, and are the things that enable people to understand the value rather than the cost of a technology that supports those decisions.
When I spoke to Mark Enzer about the report that was called Our Shared Understanding, which really looked at the built environment challenges around circularity, there was a comment in there which says there are limits to the circular economy in the built environment because virgin materials will always be needed and there'll always be some residual waste. I mean, is that how you see it?
Well, it depends, doesn't it? It depends on what you design and how you design it. It depends as well on how much you need to use. So it really depends what you're looking at. I mean, my view, I'm not limited by, looking at a 5 or a 10 year horizon. I'm not limited even in my mind by a lifetime, like I think I've talked about this before, but, in the world of BIM, for example, thinking about Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, there's a knock on the door and someone says they're going to build a superhighway through your planet. Well, in 100 or 200 years time, someone knocks on the door and says, I've come to change your windows or your solar panels or whatever. Because they're due for renewal. It's on us, don't worry about it. They're going to be twice as good. And you say, oh, really? And you look in your diary and it says Windows being changed today. And you're, oh, brilliant. And that's the way of thinking about it. So I just wonder if, what are we looking at? If we're looking at the whole system and we're looking at life cycles, a building, obviously 25, 50 or 100 or plus years, in some cases, what are we designing for? And what materials are we using? So if we put insulation into a building, for example, and it's expanded, foam and whatever, then there's going to be some challenges around that. I would argue we need the technology for that now, something I'm working on, because we're going to have a whole load more of this stuff coming out in the next 20, 30 years as we adapt buildings. So you've got to think about that when you design them.
So it's thinking if you just try and make improvements in the way that you're already doing things, you're probably going to struggle. You need to think very differently and using different materials.
Yeah, exactly that. And it doesn't mean, like, it's a really good example. You could argue, and people do argue, polyester is really bad because of microfibers and microplastics and just plastic generally. Others would argue that cotton is really bad for the environment. If you grow it in an environment in a place where water is short supply, there's 2,500-3,000 litres of water goes into making one cotton t-shirt, So there's no great outcome from any of these things. It's just how can we maximize the upside and minimize the impacts, but ultimately how can we use the right amounts of these things rather than not caring, making another cheap one and throwing it away, whatever it is, whether it's a building component or clothing.
Talk a bit about you, John, because your career started in environmental communications with Corey Environmental back in 2000. And a lot of what you talk about, and I suppose a lot of the processes that you've always gone through, is not only coming up with ideas, but actually persuading people to those ideas, whether that's the public or professionals. I mean, you say that, back in 2000, the key that you had was setting a clear strategy with measurable outcomes. And you said, in a time before social media, apps and lazy ways of measuring performance, what did that grounding teach you about getting those messages across to people and getting them to understand what they need to do?
it's all about language, really. You and I are both obviously fans of language. We use quite a lot of it, some of it more colourful. I think it's about language, and it's about keeping it really simple, and tailoring the message to the right audience, but really breaking things down. My favourite word is why. It's probably one of yours as well. It's, just challenging. And I think, really getting people together as well. So again, my background is comms and stakeholder engagement. And I guess this, where I am now, what we're doing now, came about through getting people who use workwear and PPE round a table to say, hey, is this a problem for you? Is it something you're motivated by or embarrassed by or want to achieve, a change? And they all said yes. And it was, the sort of the biffers and the tarmacs and people like that who, again, several years ago, but that comms approach, that human piece and the comms approach to really breaking stuff down, I think is key to all of this. And it's so easy, and I've done it with journalists as well. It's so easy to hypercomplicate things, especially if you want a problem to go away. But actually, to solve a problem, you really need to boil them down, and that's literally what we've been doing with the material processes we've been involved with.
But 20 years ago, you were at London Remade, and amongst other things, were helping the capital to develop these markets for recyclable materials. 20 years on, is it any easier today?
Yes and no. I'm always surprised, shocked, disappointed, upset, and then I laugh that we still talk about how the best way of collecting things. One, because it isn't that difficult, really. Come on. Two, someone has to pay, and we're still not really addressing that point. And three, you need to make sure you've got the technology. But four, I think, is the really big one that's missing, which is, if we've got all this stuff, what are we going to do with it? And how can we make really good economic use of that in our economy, in the UK, in Europe, wherever, but in our economy? How can we really grab hold of that opportunity? Which is why, earlier I mentioned the carbon border adjustment mechanism, things like that, internal carbon pricing, they all help with shifting that on and saying, okay, well, actually this, we need to do this, we need to do it differently. That affords you space and time to think, but you need the technology to underpin it. So I guess that, that for me is, I laugh and cry, but also, we've got to get on with the technology. We've got to get on with those solutions as well.
And we've also got to get on with convincing people. And I suppose, your background, as you say, is in this communications and public consultation. You created your own environmental consultancy, Source Consultancy in 2005, which merged with 3G in 2012 to become Copper Consultancy. We spoke to Martin McCrink on the who now runs that business on the podcast a few months ago. And that business, of course, has helped many major clients with their environmental public engagement strategy. You've more recently launched the Association for Consultation and Engagement. Is the infrastructure sector getting better at making the case for investment, at making the case for interventions, at making people feel better about those interventions?
I think the public engagement, the community relations piece, if you like, still tends to be something that is started too late. Even when, a large organisation building something might think they're starting really early, i.e. before they submit a planning application, it's a bit late. So I think we could still get much better at that. It's very easy to end up, and I get it, hiding in a cupboard. And Martin might have said some of these things as well. He's amazing, by the way. But it's very easy to sort of, feel like you're under attack. And I guess, and I was talking, you quoted me earlier. I can't remember that quote, but it's quite good. In terms of social media, it's very easy to be overwhelmed by what seems like a very high level of audible volume, large number of people. But in reality is probably less than 5% of the people that you might go and talk to if you actually get out the cupboard and go down the road and hold an event and speak to people. And if you're very early with explaining how things work, why they're important, what you're going to do, and that there are options, there are things that people can influence, you'll have a much better experience. And so I think for the ACEP, it's the Association of Consultation and Engagement Professionals. that's a really important message, and bringing those people together so they can share that experience and frustrations and whatever, is a really big part of that. So I've still got one foot in that, with Fraser, my friend, my colleague and friend there, from our consultation engagement days, because I just think it's something that we can genuinely shift on, and it's really important with the transition to net zero as well.
Yeah. Well, I'll put a link in the show notes, to that website, so people who want to get involved in the ACEP as it is now. You are super busy, and I can't let you go without mentioning what you get up to down in Bournemouth, where you live. As far as I can tell, you spend every non-working hour either riding BMX or coaching kids on BMX at the track in Bournemouth, where I think you are the club down there. You're vice chair and head coach still. You're an am I right, a British champion? Do you still race, or is it all about the next generation? What do you get up to down there?
I think you have to know when your time's up, don't you? Really, something I know we've talked about before, but I used to race. I did very well. You're absolutely right. I'm very pleased about that. Dying out forever on that. Only with BMXers though, because they're the ones who understand it. But yeah, it's an extreme sport. It's quite dangerous. It's a very high level of technical sort of ability, I suppose, you need to be able to fly around the tracks that are increasingly difficult and demanding and fast, at the speeds they are. I've got 15-year-old boys, one's a goalkeeper and the other one's a BMXer. I spend quite a lot of time with both, but obviously a bit more with the BMXer on the long journeys. It's an amazing sport. It's a gateway to a lifetime of riding bikes, which is why I love it. Yeah. Kids can pick up a 50 quid BMX. They can go to their local BMX track or pump track or just skate park or just jumping up and down curbs and in the woods and whatever. So for 50 quid you're on a bike probably for life, because it's an amazing thing. I know you ride your bike as well, not quite the same way, maybe you bunny hop up a curb, but that's pretty extreme in London these days.
I walked by the Brixton track the other day and it scared the living daylights out of me. So
yeah, put the saddle down, but it's it's great fun. And I run talent development in the South region, working with British Cycling. I've been helping them with the sustainability stuff as well, actually, which is another story. But
you took a talented group of riders to, is it an international meet recently? And you run a thing called Team Mind. What's Team Mind and why?
Team Mind, yeah. So there was a first European rounds the last weekend down in southern France, which I took my son to, and other GB riders were there, which is great. Team Mind is a thing I set up with another friend who had some mental health issues, like I would say we all do from time to time. And he'd done a bike ride to raise some money to sort of say thank you to Mind. And, he said to me, we're all BMXers. He said, well, we could do something else with this. And I said, why don't we do something? And, I supported him to set it up. Now I'm running it. So we've got a group of really talented development riders, if you like. So really supporting them to develop on their journey, but mainly is to raise awareness of mental health and mind in particular, and particularly amongst, 40, 50-year-old blokes who don't tend to talk about these things and really ought to, just to put it in their consciousness, really, and asking twice and being in your mate's corner and all those things you've heard, mates in mind, those kind of movements and missions are really, really important. So that's why I'm doing that. I'm also involved with a thing called BMX Race Hub, so I'm a presenter on that. It's a YouTube channel, check it out. We're in our second year this year. It's great fun. And that's really about taking the sport, which, as I say, is a gateway to riding bikes for life, to even more people. So, the more people we can get on bikes, the better it will be in every way.
I imagine it's going to be featuring quite large in Paris this year when the Olympics start. So I look forward to looking at that and possibly seeing some of your protégés down there as well, maybe.
I think there's a few I've been working with and other coaches have been working with, and where, the focus there is on LA in 2028. So I could list a few names now that I think you'll see there. I'll tell you offline, and maybe we can track their progress. But yeah, there's some super talent. We're in a really good position in GB at the moment with bike riders generally, but with BMX freestyle and racing. There's some very, very talented riders out there, inspired by our current gold, silver and bronze medalists in both disciplines, which is fantastic.
Well, getting back to sustainability and circularity, we are on the road towards a general election, and the government appears to be taking something of a backward step when it comes to driving forward environmental policy. I mean, is that how you see it? Are you concerned?
Yeah, I am. But then, I don't know. Do we get political on this thing or not? I mean, well, let's reflect back. It seems to all of us, I think, as commentators, that the current administration see their days are numbered. There's a Labour administration that I think have got some really good ideas, some really good policy. I'm not particularly political in, foot in both camps, if you like. I think there's good and bad. And,
are there dividing lines that you see when it comes to sustainability, waste management, circularity? Are there policy areas which actually do create that divide?
Yeah, I think it's supporting the free market with the things it needs to make the changes that are necessary. So giving a signal. A really good example we're both familiar with is the landfill tax. It was really effective, still is, and they've just gone up, hasn't it? Really effective. I mean, no one really talks about it now. I think it's a big tax. But it's been so effective, but only so far. It got us to recovering energy. There's some more stuff we need to do, probably, to continue that drive. Yeah. But most important is probably tax regimes around R&D investment, supporting that, around transition technologies, around net zero, and ultimately around outcomes as well.
Yeah. And presumably also support for businesses like Stuff for Life.
That would be lovely.
What happens next for Stuff for Life?
What happens next is we upscale, basically, on the polyester front. So we need a very modest amount of money. Actually, the most important thing that would really help us right now is for people to really get involved with Arco and the product that's available. And also, I'd really like to work with organisations around the second time and keeping stuff in play. So if you've got a big rebrand coming up, it will cost more. Well, it will look like it costs more, but I would challenge actually what people are paying at the moment to get rid of stuff. But yeah, we're really keen to be working with organisations that actually want to make a difference, that want to wear that commitment to sustainability, to net zero, to circularity. And every time you pull on your jacket, you're remembering that actually you can make a difference. Yeah. So I think that's the sort of call to action, if you like.
Well, as I alluded to earlier, ENV23's mantra is actions speak louder than words. What for you are the key actions needed to boost infrastructure's circularity?
The simple one is put your money where your mouth is. We've all got lots of commitments and policies and, whatever. It might even be claims, but there's a commitment there. Where's the actual kind of, real commitment, and working with rather than against your supply chain. So, I think there's a reality check around cost versus value. So the biggest thing would be to look at the value of doing something differently. So, for example, if you buy a jacket that lasts twice as long and it costs 20% more, that's probably good value.
Yeah.
Just as an example, or it could be anything. It could be a building product. It could be a car. It could be anything, couldn't it? Really. But if it's a slightly more expensive thing to purchase, or it's a service that is a price per month, but actually the outcome, i.e., the total amount you spend for the life of that product, process, or whatever service, is lower, and you're going towards your net zero targets, and you're incorporating recycled material, and the performance is better, why wouldn't you? So if we just focus on that unit cost, we're never going to make progress. And let's work it out together. Let's get to that cost neutral over a reasonable period of time basis. That's the only way of doing it, I can see.
John, a great point to end on. Very best of luck with the judging process for the Earthshot Prize. A phenomenal achievement getting nominated, and it will be fantastic, I'm sure, for you and the business if you actually get a bit further and get down to the finalists, etc. So good luck with that, and good luck, of course, with the BMX riding. Thanks for joining me today on the Infrastructure Podcast.
Thanks very much.
Great. That's all we've got time for today, but we have got more from the Infrastructure Podcast in the pipeline and more guests to talk to as we continue to probe the big issues faced across the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website, the www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you'll find background links to some of the issues we talked about today, but all the latest podcasts to listen to and share with colleagues. So thanks for joining us today. Thanks again to John, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.